미디어 프로젝트 9주 2차 시강의를 시작하겠습니다. 챕터 6은 기하급수 기업 세우기입니다. 10번째 단계는 문화를 세우는 것입니다. 공식적인 업무 관계가 아니라 가까운 친구 관계를 이루었던 페이팔의 사례를 생각해보면 기업 문화가 얼마나 중요한지 알 수 있습니다. 빠르게 확장하는 기업에서 MTP 및 소셜 네트워크 기술과 함께 문화가 비약적으로 성장하는 기하급수 기업 전체를 하나로 묶어주는 접착제 역할을 합니다. 저명한 호텔리어 콜리에 따르면 문화란 상사가 자리를 떠났을 때 벌어지는 일이라고 합니다. 여기에 한 가지를 덧붙인다면 문화는 기업의 가장 큰 무형자산입니다. 기업 문화의 정착은 성과를 효과적으로 추적하고 관리하고 보상하는 법을 익히는 데서부터 시작합니다. OKR에서 시작해 직원들이 투명성, 책임감, 실행, 높은 실적에 익숙해지게 만드는 과정입니다. 문화는 전략보다 강합니다. IBM의 Think에서 구글의 휴게실과 자포스의 Fun까지 문화가 기업에 주는 가치는 상당합니다. IBM은 직원의 창의력에 크게 의존하기 때문에 Think 문화를 만들기 위해서 다양한 노력을 펼치고 있습니다. 관련 동영상을 보시겠습니다. 구글 회사의 경우에는 항상 테크놀로지의 프론티어에서 일을 하기 때문에 창의력이 있는 사람들이 많이 필요합니다. 회사 분위기도 창의력을 권장하는 방법으로 많이 세팅되어 있습니다. 관련 동영상을 보시겠습니다.
Google is a place that I just fell in love with the culture. I fell in love with the energy. There was just a vibe that I wanted to be a part of.
It's just some place where I can never imagine myself getting bored because we're thinking about billions of users. And so that's a lot of impact that you can have, and it's just really gratifying.
Google is so much at the forefront of technology, and the way that our culture is built, we are always looking for the 10x. We are always looking for the leapfrog innovation.
So you have to be willing to let all your preconceived notions be broken at any moment.
You're gonna have to make your own rules sometimes, and this is actually part of the fun.
I get to try new technologies. I get to implement them in different ways that maybe no other company has done them before. And so you can really go beyond your skill set that you think you have at the moment and push the boundaries.
The part that makes it really fun is there are so many teams across Google that have amazing expertise. And I get to work with these people, not only build something with them, but I learn so much.
Pick any topic and I can promise you there's someone here who is both better at it than you or more knowledgeable and also, and more importantly, willing to help you learn.
Everybody here is so nice. They're so encouraging. So That's very reassuring to be in a company where people value you.
I am fortunate enough to work with people from a lot of different experience, a lot of different backgrounds, and we use that in our advantage.
It's really the best idea wins. There's a lot of debate, but it's really to bring those different viewpoints together, and that's what we want our products to represent.
We believe the benefits of technology should apply to all. And that's a mission that really is very, very inspiring.
So when I show up at work, I'm able to do all the things that I love, solving hard problems and working for the people that I manage. That makes it worthwhile for me to show up every day.
아마존의 경우에는 부서마다 회사 컬처의 차이가 많이 있습니다. 아마존의 이커머스의 현장에서 일하는 직원 경우에는 창의성보다는 효율성이 훨씬 중요합니다. 이 때문에 회사 컬처가 종종 문제가 되고 있습니다. 한 저널리스트는 이러한 문제점들을 취재하기 위해서 언더커버 직원으로 일을 했고 이러한 경험을 바탕으로 책을 냈습니다. 관련 뉴스 동영상을 보시겠습니다.
There's a new book out shedding light on brutal working conditions at Amazon fulfillment centers. In January, Amazon boasted that it shipped 5 billion items in 2017 through its two-day shipping Prime membership program. That's about 158 purchases per second. Just 2 weeks later, a study found that more than 1,000 Amazon warehouse employees in Ohio were living on food stamps.
Now, in a statement, Amazon told CBS, "We support people who are not performing to the levels expected with dedicated coaching to help them improve," adding that more than 10,000 warehouse employees started in temporary roles. For his book, Hired, 6 months undercover in low-wage Britain, journalist James Bloodworth temporarily worked as a fulfillment center picker, and he described the work environment as dehumanizing, saying that employees were treated like robots.
And James Bloodworth is in London to break this down for us. Good to see you, James. Thank you.
Hey.
How did this project come about, and what was the job that you had when you worked at Amazon?
So the book generally came about because in 2016 there was, in the headlines there was a lot of good economic news about record number of people in work. It felt like at least on the surface that the country was recovering after a long recession, but behind that there was lots of different data which said a kind of different thing. So big rise in kind of precarious work, big rise in we had the longest wage freeze for something like 150 years. So I went out and thought that an interesting way to kind of get a real idea of what's going on in the economy would be to go undercover at some of Britain's biggest companies.
So let's talk a little bit about what it was like to work at this fulfillment center. You say there's a demerit point system at the warehouse. How does that work?
Yeah, so there's a point system, and each point is basically a disciplinary. So if you get 6 points, you lose your job, and you'd get points for things like if you took a day off sick. So I was ill one day, and I was given a point for that. If you took too long going to the bathroom, you would get a point for that. Or if your productivity fell below a certain level compared to your co-workers, you would get a point for that. Or if you were late, if you swiped in late when you turn up for work, all kinds of things, you get a point for this, and that was their kind of disciplinary system.
아마존의 물류센터는 극도의 효율성을 필요로 하고 있고 그 때문에 이러한 포인트 시스템이 존재합니다. 반면에 직원들 입장에서는 이러한 포인트 시스템 때문에 큰 심리적 압박을 받고 있습니다. 이처럼 조직 문화는 업종마다 회사마다 큰 차이가 있고 한 가지 방법이 모든 경우에 적용될 수가 없습니다. 가장 독특한 회사 문화를 갖고 있는 것은 자포스로 경영대학에서 케이스 스터디로 많이 인용됩니다. 관련 동영상을 보시겠습니다.
And so how do you build the culture without suddenly sounding like it's just all these corporate bromides that you see on the wall in every corporation that nobody reads and they're meaningless? How do you actually build a culture that everyone is proud of, makes decisions based on, and so forth?
Yeah, so we actually rolled out our core values in 2005, so about 5 or 6 years into it, and we didn't always have core values. And it was actually one of those things that a lot of us resisted, even myself personally, because for exactly that reason, it felt like one of those big corporate things to do that no one paid attention to. But then we decided to approach it differently because we wanted to come up with committable core values. And a lot of companies have, they might call them core values or guiding principles or so on, but the problem is usually they're very lofty sounding. They kind of read like a press release that the marketing department put out, and maybe you learn about it on day one in orientation, but then it's that meaningless plaque on the lobby wall that you're talking about. And for us, by committable, we meant that we wanted to hire and fire people based on whether they're living up to those values, completely independent of their actual job performance. So even if they're doing their specific job perfectly fine, even if they're a superstar, if they're not living up to those core values, then we will fire them just for that reason. And we didn't just have a few senior executives go to some off-site long weekend and come up with something, but instead I sent an email out to the entire company asking everyone what should our core values be, got a whole bunch of different responses back, and went back and forth for about a year, and then eventually came up with our list of 10 core values.
And so what are some of them?
Some of them are create fun in a little weirdness, for example. When we first rolled it out, people either loved it or they hated it. And so one of our interview questions is actually on a scale 1 to 10, how weird are you? And if you're 1, you're probably a little bit too straight-laced for the Zappos culture. If you're 10, you might be too psychotic for us. But it's actually not so much the number we care about, it's more how people answer them, because our belief is that everyone's a little weird somehow. And this is really more just a fun way of saying we really recognize and celebrate each person's individuality. And we want their true personalities to shine in the workplace. Because what we found is that's when people can be themselves, that's when the real friendships form, not just coworker relationships. And that's when the creative ideas come out, and that's when employees are most productive.
And another core value?
Be adventurous, creative, and open-minded. One of our interview questions for that is, on a scale 1 to 10, how lucky are you in life? 1 is, I don't know why bad things always seem to happen to me. 10 is, I don't know why good things always seem to happen to me. And this was actually inspired by a research study I'd read about where they actually asked that exact same question, and then they got answers all over the board from random participants, and then afterwards they had them do a task. And the task was to go through a newspaper and count the number of photos that were in that newspaper. But what they didn't know was that it was actually a fake newspaper, and sprinkled throughout the newspaper were headlines that would say things like, if you're reading this now, you can stop, the answer's say 37, and collect an extra $100. And they found that the people that consider themselves unlucky in life generally, they went through the task at hand, but basically never noticed the headlines. And the people that consider themselves lucky in life generally stopped early and made the extra $100. So the takeaway being that it's not so much that people are inherently lucky or unlucky in life, but luck is really more about being open to opportunity beyond just how the task or situation presents itself. So that's why we asked that question for that core value.
You've built this incredible culture at the company. You've maintained it as you go through Amazon.
It's actually not just maintaining it. There's a lot of companies, as they grow bigger, the culture goes downhill. And not only do we want to prevent that from happening, but the real key to our future is we actually want culture to scale and get stronger and stronger, not just maintain. And so the only way that can happen is if every employee views as part of his or her job description the responsibility to contribute to our culture and make it stronger and stronger. It's not something I can do as an individual, because as we get bigger and bigger, I'm a smaller and smaller percentage of the total employee population.
코퍼레이트 컬처는 대단히 중요하지만 여러 가지 요소들이 복잡하게 연결되어 있어서 연구를 하기가 대단히 힘이 듭니다. 듀크 대학에서 수행한 코퍼레이트 컬처 연구의 동영상을 보도록 하시겠습니다.
I'd like to tell you about a research project on corporate culture that I've been working on with Cam Harvey and Jill Papadoc from Duke and Shiva Rajgopal from Columbia University. This project's been supported by the Cole Center here at Fuqua and by CFO Magazine. Now, if you read the headlines, you see corporate culture often gets blamed or gets credit for dramatic corporate events. So, for example, the VW emissions scandal and recent events at Wells Fargo, we read about corporate culture leading to maybe a bad outcome. With Google, corporate culture gets at least some of the credit for Google having such a fantastic and successful company. So corporate culture is everywhere, and I have to admit I approached this research project as a bit of a skeptic. What exactly is this corporate culture? Is it really as important as these headlines say it is? And if it is, how does it work? These are questions that I wanted to answer and our research team wanted to try to answer. So what we did is we went out and surveyed 1,900 CEOs and CFOs from around the globe to ask them about corporate culture, what they think of it, how it works at their companies. We also interviewed companies one-on-one, executives from companies one-on-one that represent the 20% of the market capitalization of the US stock exchanges. So we had quite a large number of companies and a lot of depth and importance of those companies. Now, it took 50 MBA students as research assistants to help us pull this off. We're really thankful for that help, and we couldn't have done it without them. All right, first question, is corporate culture important? Yes, executives tell us resoundingly corporate culture is very important and it affects many parts of the company. So we went about trying to address this in two different ways. One was we gave executives a long list of possible value drivers, things that create value at their companies, and we asked them to rank those items. And it turns out corporate culture came out on top, the biggest value driver at companies. More important than the strategic plan, than the operating plan, more important than the CEO, and me, a finance professor, more important than the finance function of the company, okay? So corporate culture, very important. It came out on top, not just in the United States, but around the globe, in Africa, Europe, in Asia, in Latin America. We saw culture showing up as either number one or maybe a close second. So culture is very important. Second way we addressed this, where we just straight on asked, how important is corporate culture at your firm? And here, about 90% of executives told us culture is either important or very important, and most of them said very important. So we've established then that corporate culture is very important. The next question is, what is it, okay? What exactly is corporate culture? So remember I told you we interviewed a lot of executives, and here's a couple interview quotes I'd like to give you a sense of what culture is. I'll paraphrase. The first is that corporate culture is like the tendons in our body. The tendons hold together the muscle and the bone, and they let our muscle and bone and body do the work it's intended to do in a healthy and productive way, okay? Like that, culture is what helps the company reach its potential, okay? Holds the company together, if you will. Another example is in the example of an orchestra. Corporate culture is like sheet music. You can hire the best trumpet player, the best violinist, and if they're not playing on the same sheet music, you won't get a very good outcome. But if you have the culture, if you have that sheet music, and they're playing in the same tempo, with same cadence, then you can have a wonderful outcome. Likewise, the culture is what helps a company reach its potential and helps the employees march together. So those interviews give us a nice idea of what culture is. But like true academics, we want to put more structure on it. We want a little framework, a little model, if you will. So we relied on existing research and kind of built on that. And what existing research says is there's kind of two ways you could break down a company. One part is the formal institutions, okay? And these formal institutions are things you could write down, the governance of the company, the compensation policies, the hiring and firing practices, kind of tangible things. Those are important. People have done a lot of research on them. We're not researching them so much in this paper. On the other side, you have the informal aspects that we call corporate culture. And culture has really two main components, the values and the norms, okay? A little lingo. But the values, they're sort of like the 10 Commandments. They're chiseled on stone. They're the things we aspire to, that we'd like to achieve, okay? But the norms are actually the day-to-day living as we strive to reach those values, okay? And one of the main contributions of our paper, in the academic sense at least, is to kind of provide evidence that these norms are very, very important, the day-to-day living of the values. In fact, we're one of the few papers to focus on norms, and our conclusion is without the norms, the values and these other things don't matter very much, okay? You can look at a recent editorial by the former CEO of IBM and the editorials in the Wall Street Journal, and he says something very similar. Values, you look along websites, you see very similar values across companies, but the norms, where the feet hit the ground, if you will, the living out of the values, is the norms, that is really what matters, okay? So how does culture work? You need to have values, norms, and these formal things, the compensation policy, for example, working together and reinforcing each other to actually achieve an effective corporate culture, okay? So you need all of these aligned. Now, a little more detail, how does culture work? What we wouldn't want to do is think, oh, if I get a good culture, I'll get a good outcome. What we'd rather have you think of it as really a two-step process. The second step is, if I have an effective culture, I get the desired outcome. But the first step, and the one that we're really more focused on, is what do we need to do to achieve that effective culture? And here it's really, again, the norms, the values, and these formal aspects like the compensation policy and governance have to all work together to give you an effective culture. And this is what we think companies should focus on a lot, is what it takes to get an effective culture. What are some of the outcomes from having an effective culture? All right, or an ineffective culture, as it might be. I'm going to talk about 4 things briefly. If you look in the research paper, there's probably a dozen more outcomes we could talk about. One is investment risk. We just lived through a financial crisis, a deep depression, or deep recession, excuse me. And what we've noticed is some companies seem to take on too much risk, okay? Now, what the executives at these companies tell us is that having a bad culture is what leads to companies taking on too much risk. A little surprising to us, a number of companies told us their companies take on too little risk. They're too satisfied with the status quo. And again, it's the culture isn't quite right to encourage the company to take on entrepreneurial risk. So bottom line here on investment risk is if you have an effective culture, you take the appropriate amount of investment risk. All right, ethics. 85% of executives tell us that when the culture is not right, it can lead to unethical or even illegal actions by employees. So it's not just the headlines that we read about. It's actually 85% of executives saying they need to get the culture right at their company or things could go sour, okay? Third, short-term versus long-term. Sometimes it's said that in the United States, companies focus too much on the short term and they should focus more on the long term. Again, executives tell us that when they have the bad outcome, focus too much on the short term, that's because the culture's not working right. When they have the good outcome, focusing on the long term, it's because the culture is working right. They have an effective culture. And then finally, let me give you a more specific example, mergers and acquisitions, okay? A very important investment decision, if you will. So here we ask, if your company has a target company in mind, and it's very aligned on the operational side, and it's the target's doing just what you want it to do, to acquire it and bring it into your company, but the culture is not properly aligned. So you have a misaligned culture. When that happens, we wanted to ask executives, well, how much of a discount would you require to acquire that target? And that will give us a sense of just how important culture is. So misaligned culture, how much would that reduce the price you're willing to pay? And we thought we'd hear maybe 15%, 20%. In fact, the main thing we heard is most companies wouldn't pursue an acquisition at all if the culture is misaligned. So that kind of tells us just how important culture is in general, but also in the M&A context, how important it is to align the cultures before you proceed. All right, let me give you a little more detail here on some of the statistical stuff we did. So far I've been a pretty high level. So we ran regressions where we tried to explain how does a company get an effective corporate culture that would lead to creativity, okay? So let's think of creativity or innovation, you might call it, all right? Well, the value that is going to lead to creativity is adaptability. So a company that has a value where it can react as times change and as the environment changes, that's a value that leads to creativity. But as we said before, it's not just the value that matters, it's also the norms, all right? So what are the norms that lead to creativity? It's developing new ideas organically within your company and the employees having comfort in offering and receiving critiques. If that's the work environment you have on a day-to-day basis, where you are developing new ideas organically and giving and accepting critiques, that's the environment that leads to creativity. Now, interestingly, there's another value that was listed but had a negative effect on creativity. When a company is really results-driven, results-oriented, maybe too focused on the bottom line, that does not lead to creativity. It actually hurts it. All right, second example, ethics. What value leads to ethical behavior? Well, integrity is such a value. That sounds wonderful, but what are the norms that are required, the day-to-day living that is required in order to achieve that value and to achieve good ethical behavior? Here, trust among employees is the most important norm, and also willingness of the employees to report unethical behavior. So if you have that happening in your work environment, you get the good, positive ethical outcomes that you desire. Now, there's a lot more detail in the paper that you can look at if you want. I'm just trying to give you a sampling today. All right, to summarize so far, corporate culture is first order important. We think of culture as being made up of values and norms. The norms are the day-to-day living of those values. And we think of it in a two-step process where the values and norms working together along with other things like compensation policy give you an effective culture, which give you the outcomes. So that all sounds all nice, but do all companies have effective cultures? If it's that easy, does everyone achieve it? No, they don't. About 15% of companies tell us they have their culture right where they want it. The rest don't. And in fact, about a third of companies tell us they need to have a considerable work or a substantial overhaul to get their culture to where they need it to be. So about a third of companies say they have a lot of work to do. How do you improve your corporate culture? All right, it starts with leadership. The leaders must define the culture and they must live those corporate and cultural values. We're not talking about the board of directors. The board of directors hires the CEO, but the CEO and the leadership team are the ones that instill that corporate culture into the company. Now, it's very important that the culture permeate the mid-level management and the rank and file employees also, or of course it's not going to succeed. So we need employees of all levels to buy in and to live the culture on a day-to-day basis. Second point, the company must invest in corporate culture, okay? They must dedicate time and resources to instill and to reinforce the culture at the company. So this involves recognizing when employees act in a way that's in accordance with the culture, celebrating those achievements, and even having promotional and hiring decisions based on achieving the culture of the firm. And finally, this is a continuous long-term commitment by the company. This is not something you achieve in a weekend retreat somewhere. This has to be happening week after week at the company to really get the culture to where you need it to be. So, I told you at the beginning I started as a skeptic. Well, our research team has concluded that culture is in fact very important, and I hope I've been able to convey to you some of the ways that culture works at the firm. We've got 2 research papers out there that you can look up if you want more details. The first paper has a lot of the statistical analysis and survey results. The second focuses on the interviews.